vamos lá para mais um vídeo que vocês mandaram. Alex Uck mandou a verdade por trás de Black Sabbath, de Jojo. Tá tudo em inglês, né? Acontece. Eu acho que a legenda pronuncia. Vamos ver.
In the Entering the Gain arc from the 5th part of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Vento Oreo, we follow Giorno Giovanna's initiation process to the Italian Gain.
Deixa eu tentar mudar aqui. Eu não sei se vai funcionar, né? Mas vamos lá. Traduzir automaticamente. Vai Brasil. Português é nosso, né? Porque tem o português, tem o português é nosso.
Passion, the organization Giorno had dreamed of joining from a very young age, ever since receiving his guardian angel, a gangster, but more importantly, a person with a mutual understanding of the importance of trust. Within the Entering the Gain arc, we see the true beginning of Giorno's journey, the events that would begin to make his dream a reality, and the point where turning back would no longer be an option. As well as introducing the first true enemy Giorno would face, Passion Capo Polpo, and his stand Black Sabbath. Not only are Polpo and Black Sabbath a great introduction to Passion itself, giving Giorno and the readers a decent idea of the organization's inner workings and ranking of authority, this also simultaneously sets up the structure for the rest of the part, showing that Giorno will have to work his way upwards through a militia of stand users to reach the boss. So for those reasons alone make Polpo and Black Sabbath perfect first adversaries, but when looking deeper into their existence, you can see that they represent much more than just a capo responsible for recruitment.
E aí as indulgências do Araki em usar música para contar história, ou referências musicais para dar contexto.
Polpo's stand is unmistakably a reference to the legendary heavy metal band Black Sabbath, but more specifically, their self-titled song, Black Sabbath. The cultural impact that Black Sabbath would have on the world and how they gave birth to a sound that would soon after be known as heavy metal is so perfectly represented through the stand Black Sabbath, and retold through Araki and Vento Oreo in a way that beautifully relates the history and impact of the band in a stand that is almost as terrifying as the music it's named after.
Tomando spoiler do Black Sabbath, provavelmente, se você sabe o que aquela música, aquela banda representa, talvez sim.
So before we talk about the stand Black Sabbath, we need to understand where the idea for it came from. The band Black Sabbath and heavy metal itself all started in industrial Birmingham 1968 with guitarist Tony Iommi. Going into his last day of work at a welding factory after recently joining a band and deciding to go on tour. But on his last day in a machine accident, the tips of Tony's ring and middle finger on his note-playing hand were completely chopped off. Tony would continue to play guitar by creating his own prosthesis made out of plastic bottle tops and leather. This made him able to play, but it was very inefficient and extremely painful. So Tony discovered that if he tuned lower, it made it easier to play with his plastic fingers, as well as created an extremely unique sound.
Because I took the ends of my fingers off, it made me create a different style of playing, which was great really, because eventually it became heavy metal.
Caramba, não fazia ideia disso. Não fazia ideia disso.
The original band that Tony Iommi planned to go on tour with was named Earth and played blues and jazz, made up of guitarist Tony Iommi, Bill Ward on drums, Geezer Butler on bass, and bipolar slaughterhouse worker Ozzy Osbourne for vocals. So one day, Ozzy presented bassist Geezer Butler with an extremely old book from the 15th century that was written in Latin and contained information of Satan and black magic. Because he knew Geezer dabbled in witchcraft, so Ozzy thought he would appreciate the book. And that same night, Geezer had awoke from a nightmare to find a dark shape emerging from the shadows at the foot of his bed, described as staring at him.
It was like a black, malevolent thing. It's a horrible feeling of it. And I just totally freaked out. And I told Ozzy about it, and he came up with the lyrics to Black Sabbath. What is this that stands before me?
So with the group's newfound oddity in this particular sound, they knew they had found something terrifying, and decided to change the band's name to Black Sabbath after the song. and that's how heavy metal was born. So what does any of this have to do with stands, gangsters, and Giorno? Well, pretty much everything. Let's start at the beginning of the Entering the Gain arc when we are first introduced to Polpo. Giorno arrives at his prison cell soon to be shocked by what stands before him, and realizes Polpo's situation being safer inside of prison in a perfect situation to conduct recruitments for Passion. Before Polpo explains the entrance examination, Giorno notices something very bizarre. While talking and eating, Polpo has bitten off his fingertips on his middle and ring finger, the same fingers on the same hand as Tony Iommi. This is duly noted by Giorno and assumed to be caused by a stand ability, as in the next few panels, Polpo's hand goes back to normal. But after we learn about Black Sabbath's ability, it doesn't explain Polpo biting off his fingertips and coming back moments later. This visual was clearly in reference to Tony Iommi, symbolizing that everything was going to change and the part was going to soon become much darker, more violent, and heavier. Much like how after Tony Iommi lost his fingertips, his sound went from jazz to heavy metal, a much darker and aggressive sound. And just foreshadowing in general that this was going to cause the birth of something new. Tony Iommi losing his fingertips resulted in the birth of heavy metal. And when we visually saw Polpo eating his fingertips off, not only did this represent the change in the story, but also the birth of Giorno as a gangster, as after he kills Polpo, he's in too deep and he cannot turn back now, and he has no other choice but to continue his mission and go forward, forever changing Giorno's life. So I think Polpo eating his fingertips was something that was planned to not make sense ability-wise, but rather foreshadow his stand and what was to come for Giorno's story. Just Polpo's section of the prison in general seems like a very twisted and cloudy reality, with anomalies like Polpo's inhuman-like appearance and shape-shifting-like abilities. But if I had to try to justify Polpo eating his fingers and make sense in the story, I would say that this was his way of activating Black Sabbath, as after his fingers are missing, in the next panel, his fingers are back to normal, and the lighter is lit, appearing out of seemingly nowhere. So as you can see from just the beginning of this arc, Araki's writing was heavily inspired by the history and origins of the group Black Sabbath. And somehow Araki found a way to perfectly and subtly link the origins of Black Sabbath starting to his own story. And this is just the beginning of the parallels between the band's story and the stand. Later in the arc, we see Giorno after he has accepted Polpo's trial and has agreed to keep the flame lit for 24 hours, and he has begun his life as a gangster. Much like both Giorno and the group Black Sabbath, they found a way to change their lives, the members of the band leaving their day jobs and everything else behind to make music and go on tour. Giorno passing by friends and acquaintances that know him by name, only to be ignored, and once Giorno starts his new dark and heavy lifestyle, to put it lightly, he drops his school life and everything he had once known behind. But even I can admit that the relationship between the early life of Black Sabbath and Giorno are a bit of a stretch, just a small parallel I thought I would mention. But one thing that is undeniable is the stand Black Sabbath spawning from Geezer's horrific experience that led to the song Black Sabbath, as well as the lyrics directly inspiring the stand's ability and appearance. When it comes to the stand's design, Araki actually commented on the stand's appearance in Jojo Veller, saying Venetian carnival dress like something out of Casanova, a famous painter from the 1700s. And with a little bit of looking through his work, I was able to find this image, which probably heavily inspired Black Sabbath. Araki also went on to say that combined with the image of a god of death, it has a wide-brimmed hat and collar because it's wearing medieval Italian clothing. So there is no denying that Black Sabbath is a terrifying stand based on its design alone. That is extremely fitting though, as at the time the song Black Sabbath was, and still is, a terrifying sounding song. The main riff of the song Black Sabbath that has come to be known as the Devil's Third was actually banned in medieval times because it was thought to conjure the devil. And when listening to the song Black Sabbath, I can't help but visualize the stand as the black figure Ozzy sings about, as it's supposed to represent a god of death, Araki said himself. And the lyrics of Black Sabbath are clearly about a Grim Reaper-esque enigma, coming to take away someone's soul who is not willing to leave. Sounding awfully similar to Black Sabbath's ability to drag people's souls and stands out by force. But that's because its abilities are so heavily inspired by the song's lyrics and Geezer's supernatural experience of having a dark shape confront him out of the shadows, which is seen as Black Sabbath's main ability of living within the shadows. But only in the shadows, as when Black Sabbath is caught in sunlight, the stand and only the stand will take a considerable amount of damage. But when the stand is in shadows, it is extremely deadly, swift, and virtually undetectable. So besides the stand's abilities that are directly inspired from Black Sabbath, being soul manipulation and the shadows, the stand has one more ability that's unique to say the least. Black Sabbath is a stand which is combined with the arrow that created it, allowing Black Sabbath to be the perfect stand for Passion recruitment, as it is an automatic long-range type stand that can decide the fate of its target. Either they live and develop a stand, or die. So very brief history lesson quick on the arrowheads, as fully explaining them could justify its own video. Hundreds of years ago, before the start of the series, an unnamed person crafted arrowheads from pieces of a meteorite found in Cape York, Greenland. And with a massive time gap, 6 arrows were found in an archaeology dig in Egypt by Diavolo. Note that the arrows have different designs. One arrow has a beetle on it and looks more complete, when the other 5 have gaps in the middle of them. Diavolo then sells 5 of the arrows, including the beetle arrow, to Enya Gael, and keeps one for himself, presumably the stand that created King Crimson, and resides within Black Sabbath. So it's commonly said that Black Sabbath just holds the stand arrow within its mouth as if they are 2 separate things, but I don't buy that. Just looking at Black Sabbath's design, it's heavily inspired by the stand arrow, with arrow motifs all over on its hands and collar. And when it comes to stands, really nothing is a stretch of the imagination, so I don't think it would be that crazy to think that when Polpo was pierced, most likely by Diavolo, he developed a stand that fused with the arrow. And if Polpo had already had experience in gained recruitment, it would have made perfect sense for him to develop a stand based around that occupation, explaining the stand's arrow-themed design. And as for the whole nonsense of why didn't Giorno get Gold Experience Requiem when Gold Experience was pierced by the arrow, the only arrow we have seen be able to grant Requiem stands is the more complete Beetle arrow. And as for Giorno not gaining a new ability like Kira after being pierced by a regular arrow, is because his person wasn't stabbed by the arrow, only his stand was. So that's the deal with Black Sabbath and the arrowhead. Pretty simple, but it seems like people either overthink it or just completely ignore the different types of arrows and their effects. But in the end, Polpo and Black Sabbath are beautiful examples of how Araki is able to draw inspirations from the music he listens to and subtly represent the music's history and themes into his own work. And for people like you and myself who are already huge fans of these bands that Araki takes inspiration from, we pick up on these little things like Polpo eating his fingers being in reference to Tony Iommi losing his fingers, and how these two completely different situations have the same overarching theme. The birth of something new, and how the stand's design was Araki recreating what Geezer Butler saw that night at the foot of his bed. A large black figure emerging from the shadows. And all of the previous aforementioned parallels that connect an Italian Gain's initiation process with supernatural abilities to the birth of heavy metal.
Brabo. Brabo. Caramba. É o Araki, né?
Thank you all for watching this video. I really do hope you enjoyed it. Originally, it was supposed to just be a very simple Black Sabbath explained because I had reread the Entering the Gain arc, and I felt like Black Sabbath didn't get enough attention. It was really overlooked in the midst of all the Part 5 stands, and I was just going to talk about the ability and the arc itself, and just not really connected to the musical reference that much, but just the deeper I looked into it, I realized that there was just a whole nother layer to this arc and this stand that you wouldn't even experience unless you went and looked at Black Sabbath themselves. So just really interesting stuff here. I know my last 3 videos have sort of been similar. The Ringo video, Kane Nothing, and now Black Sabbath, all sort of connecting the stands to their real life counterparts. I will try to get some variety in videos soon, but as for now, that's just what I'm enjoying most about JoJo right now, is learning things about not just these stands, but the impact that their actual musical references had on the world and stuff, and how Araki,
cara, o Jojo deve
sort
ser
of without us knowing, subconsciously has been
campo
relating
muito
that to the
rico
abilities and stuff, and it just has me excited
de
for what
assimilar
other
essas
stand battles
informações.
did I read that I didn't even notice.
Até mesmo
was
fazer
completely
reflexões sobre
influenced
o
by the
que o
musical
Araki
reference,
faz
so
com as
maybe I'll just
músicas,
look into more stands and
stand,
try to keep doing things this way. But anyways,
como
thank
ele
you all for watching
utiliza
again. I
isso
really hope you enjoyed.
para criar os seus
Like the video,
momentos,
it really
seus
does mean a lot, and subscribe to
vilões,
my Twitch channel if you want to support the
mocinhos
making
e
of
tudo
these
mais.
videos directly. Anyways, guys, thank you all for watching.
Seus bonecos. Cara, legal, bom saber. Esse tipo de conteúdo é legal, de você ter algumas similaridades que aumentam mais o campo de interpretação do significado das coisas, sabe? É legal ver essas referências, é legal pegar essas histórias. Eu não sabia, por exemplo, como que ele juntou todas essas peças para fazer esse quebra-cabeça muito louco do Black Sabbath. E provavelmente ele fez isso em vários outros stands, sabe? Usando não apenas a referência da banda, mas os contextos de algumas artes que ele pode ter utilizado como referência também. O Araki, ou a questão de moda também, o quanto ele usa isso. Quanto ele deve ter já assimilado algumas roupas, algumas grifes. Porque o Araki é um monstro. O Araki é doido desse jeito. Então é legal, cara. Bacana. É sempre muito bom conhecer mais sobre o Araki. E é isso. O canal, inclusive, não tinha falado, é o X-Force. E é inglês, né? Então, se você manja de inglês, tá aí a referência, tá aí a indicação. E a gente tentou ver, mas a legenda também não faz milagre, né? Tem vídeo que é em inglês, então não tem muito o que fazer. Mas é isso. Valeu e um bom anime. Até o próximo.